On this episode of the Star Trek Universe podcast, we are continuing our Picard Primer, talking about Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 4, Episode 2, Family. Right after this.
Welcome to the Star Trek Universe podcast. My name is Matthew Carroll.
I'm David C. Robertson.
What's up, my friend?
Oh, you know, man, just the normal BS.
Yeah. I have particularly ridiculous BS the last few weeks because of this podcast. We've been doing this Picard Primer, and you know this, but we haven't told the listeners at all. I got inspired doing all these Picard Primer episodes between our last record and this record, so in the last week, and decided to write songs about every one of these Picard episodes, Primer episodes. Mm-hmm. So in the last week and a half or so, I've written 3 songs, one for Measure of a Man, one for...
You're skipping Neutral Zone.
I am skipping Neutral Zone. I didn't like Neutral Zone. I didn't think there was any emotional core to that song. So like the whole idea behind writing these songs is I'm trying to like find the emotional core of the episode and write from that character's perspective, I guess. At least that's what I've done thus far. I skipped Neutral Zone because I didn't think it had an emotional core.
And you know what? You said that, and I haven't even told you this. You've been like sending me updates of the songs and stuff, and they're good. I really enjoy them. But the whole time I've been like not even actively, but in the back of my head, like tinkering on a Neutral Zone song from the perspective of Sonny, the musician.
That's a good call. Yeah, Sonny. I could see that. Hey, have you been tinkering? You know, you send me your notes or whatnot, and or we can work together. Right? If you write it, I'll put it to music.
All right, man.
Anyway, so for the plan of the podcast, we're going to be releasing. With the future episodes, we're going to be releasing songs that are going to play at the end of the podcast. And over the next week or so, we're going to send the backlog of songs, the last 3, including the one that we're talking about today, Family, which, what an episode of Star Trek, my friend.
I love this episode.
Oh, me too.
I just want to hit Picard's brother.
Interesting. I found Picard's brother kind of lovable.
Like, at the end of the episode, yeah.
The one thing I really like about this episode, among the many things I like about this episode, is even though Robert is clearly sort of the antagonist in this scenario, he's still his brother. And he's a brother, like, he's an antagonist the way brothers are actually the antagonist. He's a Luddite, but, like, he has his principles that he believes in, but it's very clear at the end of the episode. I don't think that he changed in the course of this episode as much. Like when at the end of this episode, spoiler alert, I guess we're getting fully into it. At the end of the episode, you find that he is letting Renee dream about the stars outside. He's like, give him more time. Like, yeah. I don't know that that's something he wasn't doing already. Like, it didn't seem to me like he had a drastic change of heart. It just seemed like maybe in front of his brother, he was too proud to admit that he was proud of him, sort of. And then when they have that fight, he says, you know, are you here to have me help you? Are you here to have me bully you again? Is that what you need? And I think like all of that is sort of like this weird sincerity in there that like I found endearing, even though it was like clear that he was just not emotionally open enough to have a discussion with his brother. It all just felt very much like brother shit, you know?
Yeah, it absolutely did. And it felt very much not like the Roddenberry vision.
Yes. Oh, for sure. For sure. And this entire episode, one thing that I can't believe, there's a dramatic climax, but there is no action climax to this episode.
Yeah.
Which is what's amazing about the episode. We just got done with Best of Both Worlds, and so you could say this is an epilogue for Best of Both Worlds, but it is one of the only sci-fi or action adventure or superhero, like a genre fiction that I can think of where there is no threat to anyone in this episode.
Yeah, and you know, they were given basically like when Pillar and company pitched this script, they were told you have to have some sort of sci-fi threat.
Right.
So they tried to shoehorn a couple of different things in and nothing really fit. And eventually they just kind of like threw away that B plot because they took, well, one of the B plots they were planning, they wound up putting in a different episode altogether. And then like one of them they just abandoned, I believe. But they eventually just wrote all of the other family stuff from the rest of the crew in to fill up the time. But it wound up working so beautifully to me.
It works incredibly beautifully. The way that the three plots that are going on, there's a Wesley Crusher plot, a Wesley Crusher getting a message from his father. I guess we should do a recap. We jumped in because we're so excited about this episode. I think I really love it. But the recap is post deborgifying of Picard after he's been turned from Locutus back to Picard. He takes shore leave for the first time in 3 years, and the first time in 20 years returns home to his father's wine vineyard in France. And basically, the entire episode is just a contemplation on family and a look at what's going on in Picard's inner life. He's kind of scared to go back out into the stars again after what he's gone through, and he's trying to figure out kind of who he is again. And I think it's such an interesting, that's it. That's the plot. And eventually it ends with him and his brother having a physical fight, which I guess you could call the dramatic climax of this episode. But it's just two old men rolling around in the mud. There's no threat to life. It's just brothers having a fight. These 50s, 60s. I don't know how old these men are, and it's supposed to be in the story. I think in their 50s.
I think Picard is probably in his late 40s or early 50s.
And they're rolling around in the mud, punching each other, and then they start laughing, and it's the tension relief that Picard needs, and he kind of has to find himself. And there's a line that his brother says, "Did you come back to have me help you again? Did you come back because you needed a little bullying?" And it kind of turns out that is what he needed. He needed to find his place in his family again, so that he can remember who he was after having himself scooped out and being Locutus. It's just an amazing episode, and it's just so different from every other, not just Star Trek episode, but every other sci-fi show or genre show I've ever seen.
And I feel like because of the whole speech that Robert gives about how, which apparently wasn't all him.
What do you mean?
Do you know who Ian Abercrombie is?
I don't know who. I don't even know who the guy playing this guy is.
He played Mr. Pitt on Seinfeld. One of Elaine's bosses. He also played Alfred on the Birds of Prey show. Oh, he was Merlin in Army of Darkness. Anyway, great actor. Apparently, he was hired to come in and overdub some of Robert's lines.
Interesting,
including primarily primarily the antagonistic lines. When Robert when the camera's pointing at Picard during their spat right before they start fighting, that is not that dude's voice. That is Ian Abercrombie's voice instead.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. That's fun.
So anyway, that's just a weird thing I know.
The actor that's playing Robert is doing some weird acting. He's those scrunchy faces. I feel like he's in an old time Western.
Yes. He keeps shoving out his lower lip for some reason.
Yeah, and squinting one eye and making the other eye real big. He does. Yeah. He's like a cartoon, and I don't know. It just seems like a guy. He is acting like an old timer, which fits his character perfectly because he's in this world where everything is technology, and he's resisted technology. He won't get a replicator. I love that they start that conversation. And I feel like in any other sci-fi show, this would have been about Picard going home and teaching his Luddite brother the way the world works. Mm-hmm. And instead, it's just about Picard needing to find his place in that world in relation to his Luddite brother without really changing his Luddite brother. And I love it. I love it so much.
I feel like Robert needed Picard to have been harmed in that way and to have been, taken down a few notches. Like you said, you needed humiliation or humility.
You needed humiliation, or was it humility? Whatever. Right. Either one would have worked, which was so affecting. Seeing Picard's response to that, especially knowing what Picard went through. I'm thinking of the tear rolling down his face while he's being assimilated in that moment where he's looking at his brother, and his brother's basically wishing that on him.
Yeah, but I think his brother needed that to be able to relate to him.
I think you're right. I absolutely think you're right. But it's harsh as hell.
It is harsh as hell. And, it's a little telling in a way. I mean, I guess it's been 20 years, but what did his brother think when he got stabbed with the freaking heart? They hadn't written that yet. But.
Sure. But also, when he's getting stabbed in the heart, it's because he's a pompous guy in a bar fight, and then he uses his technology to just get over it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So it's just another case of his brother off gallivanting in the world and using technology to get over all his problems. So like, I don't see that as I mean, he went through a hardship in the past. Like, we all go through hardships, but this sounds like it was, as he says, humiliating. When Picard is crying and saying they used me to do horrible things, like that's that line, man. Whew.
By the way, I'm pretty sure they hadn't shown it, but they did mention Picard's heart situation. I think in the episode where he went to take Wesley to Starfleet or whatever.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I just want to throw that out there.
There's almost nothing to say about this episode except how good it is. It's so good. It's so funny when there's something wrong with an episode. Like, even if it's just a small thing, there's plenty to sort of like bat around and talk about what could have been different or what. But it's just so good, and I don't want to sit here and just fan out for 40 minutes or whatever. But like, man, it's great. That's part of what we do here. So sure, why not?
Yeah, all right, let's wrap it up. I don't know.
Well, let's talk to the other plot lines a little bit just to give him a little service. So we got Worf seeing his family, and yes. See, this is another thing that I'm learning rewatching. I always think of the show as not having many overarching plots because I still stand with the fact that like I don't think this show has enough transformation of the characters throughout because they're very similar at the end as they are at the beginning. But there's a lot more overarching plots than I remember. Every episode we've watched, there's been some connection to a previous episode or something that I remember being connected to a further episode. And this one was recently Worf lost his commendation with the Klingons, I guess. I don't really even fully understand what that means, but I guess some sort of dishonor came upon him. And so his family is visiting kind of in the wake of that. Yeah,
he was completely just, thrown aside by his people. He was dishonored completely. Like, I think he was stripped of his house.
That's right. I remember that vaguely, but I'll have to rewatch those episodes someday. But for now, we're doing Picard. But it's a really cute subplot for sure. All the stuff with his father. I really like his father keeps going around saying, "At home, I have all the specs and diagrams of the Galaxy class starship." His father's a big starship head. Loves all the starships. So that's just a fun. Mostly used for comedy, but also a little bit of development with Worf, a little bit of digging into his character and the sort of two worlds that he is from. How hard he's worked his whole life to be a part of the Klingon culture, talking about how he wouldn't eat Earth food and things like that. But then now he's been dishonored and had his house taken away. Like that's even just what I see in this episode. That's obviously a trying thing for him.
And I loved his dad. I loved.
Me too.
I loved his short, far too short conversation with Chief O'Brien. And
yeah, there's a line in there that I thought would not okay. It wouldn't even have been noticeable when this came out in like 93 or whatever. But when he says, "Well, women," like it's such a it's a fine joke. It's fine, but like I can't imagine. That joke now would probably not go on a sitcom, or at least the character it would come from would not be as endearing. You know what I mean? It's just funny how culture changes, and the march of that sort of he's not being hateful toward women, but he's definitely like sort of putting them off or like whatever. He's belittling them to some degree, and I just really I think it's funny how that works and how that joke probably wouldn't work now.
It probably wouldn't work now, except for the fact that I believe this begins what I have often said is a trend with Chief O'Brien and later Julian Bashir.
Yeah.
The people of the future are very evolved. Miles O'Brien and Julian Bashir never got that memo. They are homophobic.
Yep.
They are sexist. And as Worf once said, they are children.
Yeah, it's real good. I love their development on DS9, and this, you're right, this is establishing that in his character, which I think is great that it's this early. What season did DS9 start? Was it 6 or 7?
I want to say 6.
Okay, that sounds right to me. So this is only 2 years before he moves over, which is so he's already like I think he was sort of a fan favorite because originally he's the chief of. Or he's not the chief engineer. He's just a ensign on this, or petty first class. I said
this is the first episode. Ronald D. Moore, I think, wrote this episode, and
oh really? Oh wow!
And actually made him chief petty officer. This is the first time O'Brien actually has a rank of any sort, and we find out that he's an enlisted man. He's not an officer, even though his little pips on his collar say differently. And if you notice throughout every time we see O'Brien, his rank says something a little different. Because they just hadn't fleshed him out at all.
Right.
They just...
I don't think he was ever intended to be a main character, at least when he started, but I guess they liked Cole Meany a lot and just kept him around and kept using him.
Well, Callum Meany was already known, over in UK and stuff. So.
Right, but he wasn't famous. He wasn't famous here, and I think that,
right.
like this show, he just clearly did a good job and kept being put into more things.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And I'm so glad that they, have him as the main cast member on DS9. But they did a really good job of fleshing him out in TNG before he ever got there. He got married to Keiko on TNG.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you actually see his wedding.
That's fun.
I love the Chief.
Yeah, me too. He on DS9 he's amazing. And he's great here too. Let's see. So the other subplot line was...
Wesley.
Yeah, the other subplot line was Wesley. So what'd you think? Very, very little goes on. Just Jack Crusher is sent a fatherly message to him from the past. A little hologram. When he goes to reach out to him and misses the hologram disappearing, that was real sad.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it's good, but very little to it. It's just Jack Crusher. If we're ever doing a Wesley primer, because they're doing a Wesley series, we'll have to cover this episode again or talk about this episode. But yeah, he's just it's his father talking about how important the uniform is to him, and basically Wesley just realizing that he's following in his father's footsteps.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of why Jack wasn't around. He says in the message, it's like, I'm not going to be around as much because of this uniform. And the truth is, he's right. He's not going to be around that much because of the uniform, because it's what ends up killing him.
Yeah, a lot of language in there, like, oh, maybe I'll do better next time, and I won't. This is me as I am now, and I wanted to record this. I'll be different in the future. And my wife goes, "Oh, Dad." I was like, no.
So funny. So yeah, that's about it for that plot line. The only other thing on the side plots I want to mention is Worf's chair, which is amazing. Yeah. Did you notice Worf's chair?
Oh, I noticed it. It's in Worf's quarters a whole lot, and it was used, I think, in a season 1 episode as an alien command seat or something.
So maybe he stole the alien command seat and put it in his quarters.
I don't think so, but
or had them replicate it. He's like, that looks comfortable.
Yeah, I don't remember which one it was on, but it was in season 1.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit. This is the Picard Primer we're in the middle of. So let's talk about what this episode reveals about Picard, and I feel like there's a lot.
Oh, can I just jump right back real quick to the Rashenkos?
Sure.
And say that, my favorite bit of that is when they're talking to Guinan and 10 Forward, and Guinan tells them that when he stares out the window towards home, he's not looking at the Klingon Empire, he's looking toward them.
Yeah. That's real sweet.
Dude, I think I actually did shed a tear.
That's great, man. Love it.
Yeah, this episode makes me cry.
Yeah, there's a lot to cry about in this episode, for sure. Well, as for Picard, I feel like the biggest thing we know about from this episode is when he went up against the Borg and he needed to find himself, he returned home. And he thought about staying home, but then, after consideration and after fighting with his brother, he realized this isn't his home. His home is the Enterprise, and he headed back. And we've seen from the trailers that he's gone back again, and it's sort of the same situation, except he's been there for a while. We don't know exactly how long, but he's been in his vineyard for a while. So I don't know. I find that interesting. I find that very so they've said in the preliminary talks about Picard that he goes home because of some of the stuff that happened with the Romulan Empire.
There was some incident too that they haven't gone into.
Yes, and we've seen flashbacks when he's talking to Data in the trailer. We see flashbacks of him some sort of bombing happening, and I think all of that, whatever goes on there, is bad enough that it drives him home. And there's no brother to fight with, and he ends up staying. Mm-hmm. And so I think this episode is very informative of what mental state Picard is in if he's stayed on that vineyard for however many years.
Yeah, we saw that he showed up he stayed at the vineyard in All Good Things, and in a move that is sure to have made Robert turn in his grave. All of those machines and stuff that we see like floating around up there at the vineyard. No, you need to be on your hands and knees, like putting rotten grapes in your mouth.
Yeah, you got to work on that sick vine, man. Which work on that sick vine through today's colloquialism sounds funny.
Yeah.
Let's see. Any other things you think stand out to you about how this will inform the Picard series?
I did wonder if like the older bald character we saw in the trailer was meant to be Luis or Louis or whatever his name was. The guy who works in the ocean floor.
Oh yeah, good call.
Who
That's
offered
possible.
Picard a position. I'm wondering if Picard doesn't, work in a consulting capacity or something with that. Because I was like, oh, that guy kind of looks like that guy.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I like that. I like that idea because it seems like a project that's going to be going on for many years following this, and so it's very possible.
I didn't see like a whole lot except for like just seeing Picard break down with Robert, and we just like one of the first times we really see Picard bare himself to somebody.
Yeah, for sure. I think in many ways he has had to be the captain, and that's something that I really thought about. Honestly, when I was writing that song, I thought about him returning home, and in his conversation with Troy, he talks about how he hasn't been home in 20 years. It's not just his experience with the Borg, but his realizing he hasn't been himself in a long time. Like he's been a servant of the Federation for so many years, and then he was taken by the Borg. And when he's leaving his his quarters actually, him and Troy have a conversation in his quarters. And he talks about going home. He looks back at the quarters like, I don't know that I can be here anymore. Like this life has rendered me in a really bad way. Like it's the same look he gives at the very end of Best of Both Worlds when you haven't really seen him have negative effects, and then he looks into that window and you're like, oh, he's in a dark place, and he's had to be the captain. He's the captain of everyone he's around. He is the leader of, and he feels like he always has to be on. It seems like, and has to be that character of the captain. And then as soon as Troy leaves his quarters and he looks back at them, it's like he's saying goodbye, because I think he already has it in his head that he might stay or might not want to come back to this life. And I love that moment.
Which is funny that he's at the vineyard in Picard, because one of the things that stood out to me in this episode was when he tells his brother's wife, I can't remember her name now for some reason, Marie, was that right? I don't know.
I don't know.
But he tells her that he had, he has realized that his place is Starfleet, but if he ever needs to be reminded again, he knows where to come.
Yeah, and then he comes there apparently and is not reminded enough to go back. But also, spoiler alert, if you're watching this for the first time, skip ahead 30 seconds if you're watching these episodes for the first time. Is it First Contact that he finds out about the fire?
No, that's Generations.
Generations he finds out about the fire. In the future, his entire family's killed in a fire, which I feel like watching those scenes in Generations are going to feel way more weighty having watched this episode so recently. Like, I'm actually a little I'm going to get emotional in those scenes, more so than I probably ever did watching it the first time, because it felt like a theoretical family. But knowing Robert and Renee and Marie, I'm like, oh, That's awful. Like, how awful is that they do that in Generations to him?
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Like, the whole time that, they're talking about... every time Renee says he's going to the stars one day, I'm just like, oh, no, you're not.
Yeah, it's real sad, man.
And it gives the end of that episode. It was written by the same guy, but it gives the end of that episode. It gives the end of that episode so much more weight and dread. Where she's like, it's getting late, and he's like, no, let him dream. I'm like, oh man, yeah, because he's never going there. He's never doing it.
Yeah,
he's dying.
It's real rough. I'm not too excited to watch that. I'm excited to watch that movie and not, because I think it's really going to be a hard thing to watch him think about having seen this so recently.
Is that part of our rewatch?
Oh, you know what? It isn't.
I didn't think it was.
I don't think it is.
I don't care.
We probably should, given that scene.
Generations is a big deal for Picard.
Okay, maybe we'll watch Generations 2. If we have the time, we'll watch Generations 2. Okay, well... This is a really great episode. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. If you're just hearing us talk about it, thank you for listening, but you need to watch this episode. It's really, really good and really informative about the Picard character. I have one quote that I really liked. I liked his conversation with Renee when they're walking. I liked his joke about what does it mean, arrogant son of a, and we'll talk about that later. I liked that, but
yeah,
my favorite line was when he's talking about their relationship, and he looks at Renee and says, well, Robert and I, and then he just pauses and says, well, maybe it's time to change all that.
Yeah.
It's just a moment of beautiful acting, and it immediately, that conversation with Renee sets up their relationship, so that immediately when you see Robert, you're like, oh, okay, get it. I get it. It's just really, really well executed.
Agreed. I really liked when they're in the mud laughing, and then Picard says, you were asking for it, And Robert says, yes, but you needed it. You have been terribly hard on yourself.
Yep. It's real good.
I really loved that.
I think in many ways, you talked about him needing humiliation. I think Robert also needed Picard to need him, if that makes sense. He needed Picard to go through something where he needed his big brother again. I think that was meaningful to Robert. To be a part of his life again, and for his I think in many ways, I think this vindicates Robert's life of bullying. It makes him realize, maybe I was a part of this great hero. I was never the hero, but I was sort of the brother behind the hero, spurring him on in my weird Luddite way.
If you ask me, things have become too convenient. All right, you want to do some trivia?
Yeah, throw some trivia at us.
All right, Michael Piller, and this I got all this from Memory Alpha. Michael Piller said that he says he was talking about wanting to do something at the end of Best of Both Worlds. He says, I can't help feeling that after what Picard has been through, that being back to normal is simplistic and incredible, especially for a show that takes such a realistic look at humanity and life. I must reiterate my feeling that there is a hell of an episode to be explored here. Why not use the next episode to explore Picard's recovery? Bandaged, his face is healing, but there is more than just physical healing to be done. It is uncertain if he can ever fully recover from the nightmares of his captivity to resume command. And as the Enterprise orbits Earth, undergoing repairs, Picard returns to his roots to find himself. There's an interesting echo of the Beirut hostages returning home to be found here. And he says the normal objections were that that we were not a serialized series. We try to tell stories that can be told in 1 hour, and that's what we do very well. When I got to the end of part 2, we made the decision not to extend it, and I called up Rick and said, hey, listen, next week Picard can be fine, but for a show that prides itself on its realistic approach to storytelling, how can you have a guy who's basically been raped be fine next week? There's a story in a man like Picard who's lost control, delving into the psychological crisis that a man like that has to face, and what does he have to do? Finally, I was persuasive enough to talk Gene and Rick into taking the chance, and I think everyone is glad that we did. Gene Roddenberry hated the script, though. As you might imagine.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was conditional to the acceptance was there had to be a sci-fi story added, and that was all dropped.
This show needed people pushing it in that direction, and a lot of the stuff that I'm loving in this rewatch is all that connectivity and how it is serialized, at least in some form, even though they did always try to keep it to 1 hour.
Yeah. So, yeah, this was the first time we got Chief O'Brien's full name, Miles Edward O'Brien. It's the first time we got his rank insignia. or his chief petty officer rank defined. Anyway.
Yeah.
And let's see. There's a bit in there where Picard mentions to Louis or Louise or whatever, however they said it. They said it both ways, actually. He mentions the changed geology of Drema 4, which was an actual reference to one of the episodes. Pen pals.
That's neat. I thought that might be the case, and that's real cool. I love that connectivity.
Mm-hmm. I know, that's why I left that in, because I knew you would enjoy that.
Yeah.
Here's something cool. Rene, his nephew, or uncle, as the joke goes, Rene tells Jean-Luc that he will someday leave the family home to go to his own starship. Now, obviously Rene doesn't, but the actor, David Tristan Birkin, who played Rene, reappeared in season 6 in the episode Rascals as a young Jean-Luc Picard.
Oh, neat. That's neat.
I liked that.
Can I tell you something embarrassing?
Absolutely. You can always tell me something embarrassing.
Yeah, I know you like to use it later. As a child, I was rewatching this episode, and there's the joke about him being the uncle, and I thought it was some sort of future relationship that I didn't understand. Because you do get that in certain things. So actually, I think it made me think that, I don't know, how could you have a young uncle? Your father or your grandfather would have had to have a really late child for you to have a young uncle. And so I was like, maybe some sort of, I don't know, some sort of reproduction that I don't fully understand. There's something going on weird in his family tree. I thought that because I still, and rewatching it, I get why I did, because he walks up and says he's his uncle from the very beginning. And I don't know, as a kid, I was like, okay, it's the future. I don't know, some sort of sci-fi uncle situation.
Oh, Lord, man.
I was 8 or something.
By the way, okay. I think if you were to release these Star Trek songs in an EP form or an album form, the title of it needs to be Future Uncle Situation.
Yeah, maybe. I was thinking about calling it Earl Grey Hot. Does that seem? I feel
that's
like it's
tired. Come on, man.
It is tired, but you need, you need something that makes it clear to people what it is, without it just being called the Picard album. Also, if I can keep this up, no, I'm not even going to say it. Okay, I'll say it. If I can keep this pace up of writing a song a week, I actually think it'd be really fun to write a song about the new Picard episodes as they come out. That could be real fun.
It could be.
Anyway, I'm enjoying writing way too many songs about Star Trek right now, so I hope y'all like them. They'll be in the feed in a couple days. So if you're listening to this, we're going to be posting those 3 songs within this week before our next Picard Primer episode, which is what episode?
I don't know. I don't have my list here.
Best of the World's Family Unification.
Parts 1 and 2.
Parts 1 and 2. So we'll be covering Unification Parts 1 and 2 next week.
That's exciting.
Man, maybe I'll get to write a song from Spock's perspective.
Ooh.
That sounds fun.
Or more interesting, maybe Sayla.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to see the episode, see where I find that emotional core.
Yeah, it won't be Sayla.
But, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
It'll be Podek.
I don't remember the episode enough to know any of those people. So that's why we'll watch it next week.
Well, Sayla is the half Romulan daughter of an alternate Tasha Yar from yesterday's Enterprise.
Oh, wow. She's in Unification?
Yeah, she's in the Romulan government. So she's treated as an antagonist a fair amount of the time when she shows up, because they kept trying to come up with reasons for Denise Crosby to come back.
Oh, so she is, but she's from another timeline?
Right. This was another fantastic Ronald D. Moore and Brandon Braga, I think, episode. Yesterday's Enterprise, where the Enterprise C comes through a wormhole, and they meet the crew of the Enterprise C, but history has changed because they disappeared. They were supposed to be destroyed by Romulans.
Right.
And instead, they they weren't, so it changed the timeline, and now we're at war with the Klingons. I think it was the Klingons. But the Enterprise is a warship, and Tasha Yar never died in Skin of Evil. And she kind of falls for this dude on the Enterprise C crew, and Guinan is the only person who realizes that everything is wrong. And when she looks at Tasha, she knows that Tasha is supposed to be dead. And Tasha figures that out and talks to her about it and decides, since I'm not supposed to be in this timeline, I'm going to go back and try to help them best I can. Well, what happens when they go back through the wormhole is they get basically boarded and she gets taken. And she winds up being like the wife of a general or some shit. And like the unwilling wife of a general, and bears a daughter, Selah. So now the Enterprise D crew keeps running into this antagonist, half Romulan, played by Denise Crosby.
That's neat.
Yep.
Yeah, I probably just didn't know it was Denise Crosby as a kid, and I don't really remember that storyline, so that's neat. That's real neat. Well, yeah, that'll be fun. Unification, Parts 1 and 2, next week. We'll be back. Actually, we'll be back in the next couple days with songs for you guys, which I'm really excited about. And hopefully, if I can get my shit together, I'll be able to write and record a song about Unification and have that on the end of next week's episode. So, pretty pumped about that.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, we'll be back soon. Peace.
Live long and prosper.
To reach out to us, hit us up at StarTrekUcast.com, at StarTrekUcast on Twitter, or search for the Star Trek Universe Podcast on Instagram or Facebook. And if you want to hear more from David C. Robertson, search for the DC On Screen podcast in your podcast app now, or go to maladjusted.tv for his comedy sketches. If you want to hear more from me, Matthew Carroll, search for the Marvel Cinematic Universe Podcast or the Orville Universe Podcast in your podcast app, or check out my music. Just search for Matthew Carroll wherever you listen to music.